The Threnn called it the loop, because they had no other word for what the human woman did, and because the truth of it made their translator nodes stutter and go silent. Her name was Della Voss, and she was 24 standard years old, and she had been dying in the same 9 seconds for 3 days. Not dying. That was the wrong word, and the Threnn who watched her through the observation glass knew it was the wrong word even as their instruments insisted on it. Della Voss did not die. She reset. When the plasma bolt found the center of her chest, when the sealed door refused to open, when the pressure differential in the failing compartment reached the threshold that no organic thing could survive, the world simply folded back on itself, 8 or 9 seconds, and she stood again where she had stood before, whole, breathing, with the memory of everything that had just killed her burning fresh behind her eyes. They had watched her die 241 times. They had counted. The chief observer was a Threnn named Sethimal Vor, and Sethimal had spent 40 years of a long, careful life cataloging the ways that living things ended. It was a respected discipline among the Threnn, the study of finitude. A creature's dignity, they believed, was measured by how it met the edge of itself, whether it went screaming or went still, whether it clawed for one more breath or accepted the closing dark. Sethimal had watched 10,000 deaths and thought there was nothing left in the whole cold catalog of endings that could surprise him. Then his ship had pulled a human escape pod out of a debris field on the far edge of the Kesson Drift, and the human inside had refused, in the most literal and impossible sense, to be finished. "Show me again," Sethimal said. The junior observer, a nervous young Threnn named Alo, keyed the recording. On the great curved screen, Della Voss walked down a corridor of the Threnn cruiser patient measure. She did not know she was being recorded then. She thought she was alone. She had been given the run of the lower decks, a courtesy and also a test, because the Threnn wanted to see what she would do with freedom, and she walked with her hands loose at her sides and her dark hair tied back, and her face wearing an expression Sethimal had not yet learned to read. The corridor ahead of her buckled. It was an accident. Later analysis would confirm this. A coolant conduit stressed by the ship's recent hard burn ruptured behind a wall panel and flooded the corridor with a gas that seized the lungs and stopped the heart in under 4 seconds. Della was 30 paces in when it hit her. She staggered. She turned back toward the door she'd come through. She did not make it. She fell against the wall, one hand pressed to her throat, and her knees gave out, and her body slid down the bulkhead and went limp on the deck, and the instruments in the observation room flatlined and screamed. And then the corridor was whole again, and Della Voss stood 30 paces in, one hand rising to her throat before she even understood why, her face already turning back toward the door. She ran. She made it out. The blast door sealed behind her with a hiss, and she stood in the safe corridor beyond with her back against the wall and her chest heaving, and she said, the audio caught it thin and human, "Not that way then." Sethimal had watched this 100 times, and it still made something cold move through the long cavity of his chest. "She remembers," Alo said quietly. It was not a question. They had established this on the first day. Whatever the loop was, it was not a machine that ran her body backward. Her mind carried forward. Every death taught her. She was functionally the only creature in the observed galaxy who could not be surprised twice by the same catastrophe, because she had already lived the catastrophe, died in it, and come back knowing exactly where the edge was. "She remembers," Sethimal agreed. "That is the part that unsettles the fleet. Not that she survives. Machines survive. Predators survive. But she survives * forward. She learns her own death and carries the lesson out the other side." He had written that sentence into his report and then sat looking at it for a long time, because it described something that his people, in all their vast philosophy of endings, had never once considered possible. The Threnn revered death precisely because it was the one door that opened only one way. It was the wall against which every living thing was finally measured. And here was a small, warm-blooded animal from a backwater system who had turned that wall into a hinge. "Have the physicians found the mechanism?" Sethimal asked. "No, honored observer." Alo's voice dipped with the shame of a subordinate reporting failure. "They have scanned her at every layer we possess. Genetic, neural, quantum correlative. There is nothing. She is only a human. An ordinary human female of her species. Slightly underweight. Old scarring on the left forearm. A healed fracture in the third rib. Nothing that explains it. The physicians say if they did not have 241 recordings, they would classify the phenomenon as instrument malfunction and dismiss it. But we have the recordings. We have the recordings." Sethimal turned from the screen and looked, through the observation glass, at the small figure in the containment suite below. Della Voss sat on the edge of the low sleeping platform the Threnn had provided her, and she was doing the thing she did every cycle at this hour, the thing that had begun, more than anything else, to consume Sethimal's attention. She was making tea. The Threnn had recovered a few personal effects from her escape pod. Among them was a small, dented metal tin, and inside the tin were dark, dried leaves and a second, smaller vessel. A cup, ceramic, chipped along one edge, glazed a deep and faded blue. Every cycle, at the same point in the ship's arbitrary clock, Della Voss heated water in the ration warmer the Threnn had given her, and she measured out a precise amount of the dark leaves, and she poured the water over them, and she waited exactly the length of time that some private internal clock told her to wait, and then she drank. But she did not drink alone. She always set out 2 cups. The second cup was not hers. It was a Threnn drinking vessel, requisitioned from the galley, and she filled it with the same tea, and she set it on the platform across from her own, in the empty air where no one sat, and she spoke to it. The audio pickups caught her voice, low, even, the tone a person uses with someone they have known for a very long time and do not need to impress. "Long day," she said to the empty cup. "You wouldn't believe the day. Nearly got me in the corridor, coolant line. Fast one, didn't feel it coming till it was in my lungs." A pause. She lifted her own cup, blew across the surface, drank. "But I found the door. I always find the door. You taught me that." Alo made a small sound in the back of his throat. She has done this every cycle. She speaks to the empty vessel as though someone occupies it. The physicians wondered if the loop had damaged her mind, whether she has separated from reality. Sethimal watched the human woman lift the second cup, the one no lips would touch, and turn it a quarter turn against the platform, the way one might nudge a cup toward a friend who liked the handle facing a certain way. Then she set it down again, untasted, and she smiled at the empty air, and the smile was the saddest thing Sethimal Vor had seen in 40 years of watching things end. "No," he said, "her mind is not damaged." "Then what is she doing?" "I don't know yet." Sethimal pressed the pad of one long digit against the cool glass, "but I intend to find out. And I do not think it will be a comfortable thing to learn." He had made a decision on the second day, and he confirmed it now, watching her drink alone with a companion no scanner could find. He would not study Della Voss from behind glass any longer. The instruments had given them everything they could give, which was to say, an impossibility with no explanation. If he wanted the truth, he would have to do the thing his discipline had trained him for and his caution had always forbidden. He would have to sit across from her, in the empty chair, and ask. The patient measure was a survey cruiser, not a warship, and it was 3 months out from the nearest Threnn holding when it found Della Voss. This mattered, though Sethimal did not yet understand how much. It meant there was no fleet command to overrule his judgment, no council of physicians to seize the specimen, no politics of ownership. There was only Sethimal and his small crew and a human woman who could not be killed, drifting together through a dark and empty stretch of the drift, 3 months from anywhere. He entered the containment suite alone. Protocol demanded an escort. Protocol demanded a sealed environment, a weapon bearer, a physician on standby. Sethimal dismissed all of it. He walked through the inner door with his hands visible and empty, and he let the door seal behind him, and he stood for a moment simply being looked at. Della Voss looked at him. She had a way of looking that Sethimal would come to understand was the mark of what the loop had done to her. She looked at everything the way a person looks at a room they have already searched. Not afraid. Not curious exactly. Assessing. As though some part of her was always cataloging the exits, the objects that could be thrown, the distance to the door, the 200 small facts that separated living from dying. She looked at Sethimal, and he understood that in the first half-second she had already decided a dozen things about how she would kill him, or evade him if she had to. Then she relaxed, fractionally, and the assessment slid off her face, and she was only a tired young woman sitting on a platform with 2 cups of tea. "You're the one who watches," she said. Her translator node, the crude one the Threnn had fitted her with, rendered her words into the clicking cadence of Threnn's speech, but Sethimal heard the human sound underneath it, and it was soft. "Up behind the glass. You've got a stillness the others don't. They fidget. You just watch. I am Sethimal Vor. I am the chief observer of this vessel." Observer, she tasted the word. Of what? "Of endings," Sethimal said. There seemed no reason to lie. "It is my discipline. Among my people, we study how living things meet their deaths. It is considered the translator hunted for a word, a sacred field. We believe a creature reveals its truest self in the moment it is finished." Della was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed, not cruelly, but with a kind of weary recognition, the laugh of someone who has heard a joke told at her own expense so many times it has stopped stinging. "Endings," she said, "and they sent you to study me. That's funny, that's actually funny." She picked up her cup and drank. "I'm the wrong subject, Sethimal Vor. I don't have any endings. That's rather the whole problem. So I have observed, 241 times. Something flickered across her face at the number. Not surprise, confirmation. She had been counting too. "You watched all of them," she said. "Yes." "And you came down here anyway, alone. Through a sealed door, with no weapon and no guard, to sit with a thing your instruments say cannot be stopped." She tilted her head, and now there was something almost like warmth in the assessment. "You're either very brave or very stupid, and you don't strike me as stupid." "I am neither," Sethimal said. "I am curious. In my experience the two are often confused, but they are not the same. Bravery is the choice to face a danger. Curiosity is the failure to notice one." That earned him a real smile, brief and bright, and for just a moment Sethimal saw what she must have been before. Before the drift, before the pod, before whatever had happened that put those old scars on her forearm and that permanent assessment in her eyes. A young woman who liked a clever answer. Who would have been, in some other life, easy to make laugh. "Sit down then, curious observer," Della Voss said, and she reached across and turned the second cup, the empty one, the one that had been waiting, a quarter turn so the handle faced the chair. "You're just in time. I made too much." Sethimal looked at the cup, at the tea in it, gone lukewarm now, poured for no one, at the space across from her that she had been speaking to for 3 days. He sat down in it. And Della Voss's face did something complicated, a flinch and a softening at once, as though he had sat in a chair that belonged to someone else, and she had decided, in the space of a breath, to allow it. "There," she said quietly, "now there's someone in the chair." She did not explain what she meant. And Sethimal, who had come with 100 questions, found that he did not ask a single one of them. He picked up the lukewarm cup, and he held it the way she held hers, and he understood that whatever he was going to learn, he was not going to learn it by interrogating her. He was going to learn it by earning it, 1 cup at a time. Outside the sealed suite, the ship hummed on through the dark, and in the observation room above, Allo watched his chief observer sit down in the empty chair, and he did not understand what he was seeing, and he wrote in his log, The observer has entered the loop. He meant it as a location. He did not yet know he had written the truth. Sethimal returned the next cycle, and the one after, and the one after that. He told himself it was research. He kept a log at first of clinical observations. The exact interval of the loop, he had timed it now across dozens of events. It was not 8 seconds and it was not 9. It was 8.4 seconds, consistent to within a fraction, as though some cosmic mechanism had set a fixed rewind and never once varied it. The conditions under which it triggered only imminent death. Never mere injury, never fear, only the true and final edge. The way she carried the memory forward intact. He wrote these things down carefully, in the language of his discipline. But the log grew thinner each cycle, and the T grew more important, and Sethimal began to understand that the clinical questions were the wrong questions, and had always been the wrong questions. The right question was the one he could not yet bring himself to ask, and it was this: if you could escape anything, if the universe itself gave you a door out of every death, an unfailing 8.4-second reset that no bolt and no blade and no vacuum could beat, then why in the vast cold dark would you ever choose to stay? Because Della Voss stayed. That was the thing Sethimal could not reconcile. She had the ultimate escape. She could not be contained. The physicians had confirmed this in a controlled and quietly horrifying experiment on the 4th day, when they had, with her exhausted consent, sealed her in an inescapable chamber, and watched the loop simply refuse to let the chamber be inescapable. Every death by suffocation reset her, and each reset she learned one more thing about the chamber, until on the 9th loop she found the maintenance seam the designers had forgotten and walked out through a gap that should not have existed. She had turned to the observation glass afterward, breathing hard, and said, "There's always a door. That's the rule. You just have to die enough times to find it." She could leave the patient measure whenever she wished. She could die her way through any airlock, any restraint, any wall. The Threnn could not hold her, and both parties knew it. And yet every cycle she was there, on the platform with 2 cups. "You keep company with someone who isn't here," Sethimal said one cycle. They had reached a point by then where he could say such things. 6 cycles of tea had bought him that much. Every day, you pour a second cup and you speak to the empty chair. Before I sat in it, you spoke to the air. He turned the blue-glazed cup, hers, always hers. He had learned not to touch that one, a careful centimeter, mimicking the small ritual gesture he had watched her make 100 times. "Who am I sitting in for, Della Voss?" She was quiet for a long time. The ship hummed. The tea steamed between them. "His name was Corin," she said at last. Sethimal said nothing. He had learned that too. That silence was the thing that opened her, where questions closed her. "He wasn't my brother. People assumed that. We didn't look alike, but we had the same," she gestured vaguely at her own face. "The same tired. You get it out where we were. A particular kind of tired that people wear. He had it and I had it, and we recognized each other across a docking bay the first day the way you recognize your own." She drank. "We were haulers, deep drift salvage, the ugly runs nobody with options takes. You go out into the dead places and you strip the wrecks and you sell the metal, and if you're lucky you come home with enough to go out again. That was the whole life. Out and back. Out and back." "And the loop," Sethimal said, "when did it begin?" Her hand tightened on the blue cup. "That's the part I haven't told anyone, not your physicians, not the ones before you." She looked up at him, and the assessment was back in her eyes, but it was a different kind now. She was measuring not the exits but him, deciding whether he was worth the truth. "You want to know how a person gets like me, how you make something that can't die?" "I want to understand you," Sethimal said, and was surprised to find it was true. Somewhere in the 6 cycles the research had become something else. "That is not the same as wanting to know how you were made, but I will take whatever you are willing to give." She turned the blue cup a quarter turn, set it down, turned it back. "There was a wreck," she said. 4th year out. A big one, old military hull, pre-collapse, the kind that shows up on no registry because the registry that logged it is 1,000 years dust. Corin found it. He had a nose for the old ones. We should have flagged it and sold the coordinates and let the professionals with the real equipment strip it. That was the smart call, that was the survivable call. But we were 9 months behind on the ship payment, and one good pre-collapse power core would have cleared us for a year. She smiled without any humor. So we went in, just the two of us, into a 1,000-year-old warship that no one had touched, looking for a power core, because we were poor and stupid and tired. And you found something else. We found something else. Her voice had gone very flat, the flatness of a person reciting a thing they have decided not to feel. There was a chamber deep in the hull, sealed different from the rest, not a cargo seal, not a blast door, something older and stranger, engraved with a script neither of us could read. Corin thought it was a vault, treasure, the big score, and she stopped. I had a feeling. I told him not to open it. I said whatever a civilization seals like that, they seal it because they don't want it to come out. And he laughed and said that's exactly why it's worth something. And he opened it. Sethimal became aware that he was holding his breath, an old reflex from a species that had once been prey. There was no treasure, Della said. There was a machine, still running after 1,000 years, still drawing power from somewhere, still lit. And I don't have a word for it, a field. When the door opened, the field was already reaching for us. It got Corin first because he was closer, and then it got me. She looked down at her hands. I don't remember pain. I remember time going wrong. I remember dying. I felt myself die. I know exactly what it is now. I've done it 241 more times since. And then I remember being 8 seconds younger, standing where I'd been standing, with the door already open and Corin already reaching for it. And I screamed at him to stop, and he didn't stop because for him no time had passed. He hadn't died yet. He didn't know. The machine, Sethimal said quietly, it gave you the loop. It gave me the loop. The emphasis landed like a struck bell. Just me, not him. The field caught us both, but it only took root, I suppose, in one of us. I've had a long time to think about why. I don't know why. Maybe it's random. Maybe there was only enough of whatever it was for one. But when it was done, I could reset and Corin couldn't. She lifted her face and her eyes were dry, which was somehow worse than tears. Do you understand what that means, observer? Do you understand what it did to me? Sethimal thought he was beginning to, but he waited. It meant I watched him die, Della said, as many times as I chose to. The chamber killed us both, over and over. The field pulsed on a cycle, it caught anything in the room, and every pulse killed him and reset me. I could feel the reset coming 8.4 seconds out, and every one of those 8.4 seconds I had a choice. I could grab him and drag him toward the door, but he was bigger than me, dead weight, panicking in the seconds he was alive, and I could never get him clear before the pulse, or I could save myself. Get out the door I'd found, the door I always find, and let the reset take me back inside and try again. Or, her voice did not break, but it thinned like a wire drawn too fine. I could just leave. Walk out. Let the loop reset me somewhere safe and never go back in. Save myself and let him stay dead in the loop I'd have abandoned. How many times, Sethimal asked, and his own voice was not steady, did you try to drag him out? Della Voss looked at him for a long moment. 2,000, she said, give or take. I stopped counting somewhere past 1,000. 2,000 times I lived those 8.4 seconds and grabbed him and pulled and died before I reached the door. 2,000 times I felt the field take us both. 2,000 times I came back and did it again. She set down the blue cup with great care. And then the 2,000 and somethingth time I got him to the threshold, just the threshold, half through the door. And the pulse caught the half of him still inside, and it killed him, and it reset me. And when I came back, Corin was gone. Not dead in the loop, gone. Gone. The field had finished him, somewhere in the getting him halfway. He didn't reset with the room anymore. There was just his body on the threshold, still and cooling, and no more loop for him, and me standing there 8 seconds younger with my hands still reaching for a man who wasn't going to reach back. The suite was silent, except for the ship's hum. I got out, Della said. I got myself to the pod. I set a course for nowhere and I sat in the dark for I don't know how long, and eventually your survey ship found me. That's the whole story, observer. That's how you make a thing that can't die. You make it watch the one person it loves die 2,000 times, and then you take even that away, and you leave it with a body it couldn't save, and a machine in its blood that won't let it follow him. Sethimal looked at the two cups, at the blue one, hers, chipped along the rim, at the Threnn cup he held that he was borrowing that had been Corrin's chair before it was his. The tea, he said, the second cup, it is for him. It was ours, Della said simply. Every night out on the runs after the day's work, 1 cup of tea, his tin actually. The leaves are his, I've been rationing them for 2 years, there's maybe a month left. She touched the dented metal tin beside her. It was the one thing in that whole ugly life that was just still, quiet, ours. He'd turn his cup a quarter turn before he drank, every time some habit from before I knew him, I never asked why, and we'd sit. And for 1 cup, nothing was chasing us and nothing was broken and we weren't 9 months behind on anything, just the tea. She turned the blue cup a quarter turn. I keep the ritual. I set his cup. I turn it the way he turned it. And I tell him about my day because... Her composure finally wavered just slightly, just at the edges, because if I stop, then he's really gone. And I'm not ready. 2 years and I'm still not ready. Sethimal Voss sat in a dead man's chair, holding a dead man's cup, across from a woman who could not die and could not follow the only person she had ever wanted to follow. And for the first time in 40 years of studying endings, the chief observer of the patient measure had absolutely nothing to say about death that would not have been an obscenity. So he did the only decent thing available to him. He lifted Corrin's cup, and he turned it a quarter turn, the way she had shown him without ever teaching him, and he drank the lukewarm tea and he said, "Tell me about your day, Della Voss." And after a startled moment, she did. Word of what Sethimal had done reached the fleet eventually. It always did. The patient measure was 3 months from command, but 3 months is not forever, and Sethimal had filed honest reports because he did not know how to file any other kind, and honest reports about an undying human who could not be contained were not the sort of thing that stayed buried in a survey ship's log. The order came on the 30th cycle. A war frame was being dispatched. The Iron Verdict, a full command vessel, faster than the patient measure by every measure that mattered, was inbound to take custody of the specimen designated VOSS, DELLA, human, anomalous. Estimated arrival, 11 cycles. Sethimal read the order twice, and then he read the appended clarification, which was written in the flat institutional language his people used when they had decided something dreadful and wished to feel clean about it. The specimen was not to be studied. The specimen was to be rendered. The Threnn War Council had convened, and the War Council had reasoned as follows. A creature that cannot be killed, that carries the memory of its own death forward, that cannot be contained by any known means, is not a subject of study. It is a weapon, or a threat, or both, and the only responsible thing to do with it is to understand its mechanism completely, which meant taking her apart, layer by layer, in the one facility equipped to keep her loop-caught body cycling through controlled deaths for as long as it took to map every last thread of the impossible thing inside her. They would put Della Voss in a chamber, and they would kill her, and they would study the reset, and they would kill her again, and they would do this 10,000 times forever, because forever was exactly how long she could be made to last. The Iron Verdict was bringing the chamber. Sethimal Voss sat with the order glowing on his console for a long time. He was a Threnn of his people. He had served the fleet for 40 years. He believed, had always believed, in the discipline of endings, in the dignity of the final door, in the quiet order of a civilization that understood death as the wall against which all life was measured. He had never in 40 years disobeyed a command. And he thought about a chamber that would kill Della Voss 10,000 times, and never once let her out the door, and he understood that the War Council had invented, without knowing it, the one thing worse than the machine that had ruined her. They had invented the exact hell she had spent 2,000 deaths escaping, and they meant to seal her in it and call it research. He went down to the containment suite. Della was making tea. "There's a change coming," he said, and he told her everything. The war frame, the order, the chamber. The word rendered and what it meant. He did not soften it because she was not a person you soften things for. She had already survived worse than anything he could say, and she deserved the truth at full strength. Della Voss listened. She did not flinch. She turned Corin's cup a quarter turn and set it in front of the chair Sethimal had come to think of as his own, and when he had finished, she was quiet for the length of a slow breath. "So," she said, "a room I can't get out of forever, a small, terrible smile. They found the one thing that scares me, clever." "You could leave now," Sethimal said. The words came out of him before he had decided to say them, and once they were out he did not take them back. "You have 11 cycles. You cannot be contained, we have proven that. Take the pod, take a shuttle. Die your way through any door you need to, I will not stop you. I do not think I can stop you, and I find that I do not want to." He paused. "There is no reason for you to be here when the iron verdict arrives. You have the ultimate escape. Use it. Run." And Della Voss looked at him with the expression he had first seen 30 cycles ago. The assessment. The searching of a room already searched. And then she looked at the 2 cups of tea, and she made the choice that Sethimal had watched her make every single cycle without understanding it, and that he only now began to understand. "No," she said. "Della, I have about 3 weeks of leaves left," she said, as though this were an answer, and Sethimal slowly realized that it was. 3 weeks of Corin. And then the tin's empty and there's no more, not anywhere, not in the whole galaxy. These leaves came from a farm on a world that got glassed in the collapse. They're the last of a thing that doesn't exist anymore. When they're gone, the ritual's over. Not because I choose to stop, because there's nothing left to pour." She turned the blue cup. "So I've got 3 weeks to say goodbye to him. Properly. 1 cup at a time, the way it should be done. And I am not going to spend those 3 weeks running through airlocks. I've done enough running. I've done a lifetime of running in 8.4-second pieces." She met his eyes. "I'm going to sit here and drink my tea and finish saying goodbye, and whatever comes after that comes after that. They will put you in the chamber. Maybe. Della, do you understand what the chamber is? It is the machine again. It is Corin's chamber forever, except this time there is no threshold and no getting out." "I understand it better than you do," she said, and there was steel in it now, the steel he had glimpsed under the tiredness. "I've lived in that room, Sethimal, 2,000 times. You're describing my home. And here's the thing your War Council doesn't understand, the thing your instruments will never scan, because it's not in my blood, it's in." She pressed a hand flat against her own sternum. "Here." She leaned forward. "They think the terrible thing about the chamber is that I can't escape it. They've got it exactly backward. The terrible thing about the chamber, the only terrible thing, is being in it alone. I spent 2,000 deaths in a killing room, and it wasn't the dying that broke me. It was reaching for Corin and never reaching him. It was being the only one who remembered. The dying, I can do. I've done it 241 times on your ship alone, and I'm still here drinking tea. It's the alone that kills what can't be killed." Sethimal sat very still. "So no," Della Voss said. "I'm not running. Running is just a different room, an empty one, and I've had enough of empty rooms. I'd rather have 3 weeks of tea in a chair that isn't empty than a forever of airlocks and nobody to tell about my day." She turned Corin's cup toward the chair. "You've been sitting in the chair, observer. Did you think that didn't count for something? Did you think I couldn't tell the difference between the air and you?" And Sethimal Vor, who had studied 10,000 endings and thought he understood the shape of loyalty, felt the whole architecture of his understanding quietly rearrange itself. He had been thinking of her power as an escape, as the ultimate freedom, the door out of every death, the one loophole in the one law his people held sacred. He had been asking, cycle after cycle, why a creature with the ultimate escape would ever choose to stay. And now he saw that he had misnamed the thing entirely. Della Voss's power was not the ability to escape. Any coward could escape. Escape was the easy thing, the animal thing, the thing every creature in the galaxy did by reflex. Della Voss's power, the real power, the one no scanner would ever find, was that she could escape and did not. That every 8.4 seconds forever in perpetuity, she was handed the door out, and every 8.4 seconds she chose the cup of tea instead. Her loop did not make her free. It made her, uniquely in all creation, choosing. Every other being in the galaxy stayed in hard places because leaving was hard or impossible. For Della Voss, leaving was the easiest thing in the universe. And she stayed anyway, not because she couldn't go, but because there was someone she wouldn't abandon, even a someone reduced now to a chipped blue cup and a dwindling tin of leaves. That was not weakness dressed as strength. That was the strongest thing Sethimal had ever encountered. And it terrified him more than the loop ever had, because it was a kind of strength his entire civilization had no category for, a strength that measured itself not against death, but against the temptation of escape, and won, and won, and won again, 8 seconds at a time, for 2,000 deaths and counting. I have been asking the wrong question, Sethimal said slowly. For 30 cycles, I have been asking why you stay when you could run. He looked at the human woman across the cooling tea. The answer is that you are not staying. Staying is what happens to a creature that has no choice. You are choosing, again and again, more often and more freely than any living thing has ever chosen anything. Every reset is a choice to stay. You have chosen to stay 2,000 times over. It only looks like one long moment of stillness. It is in truth 10,000 separate acts of loyalty, stacked one on another, each one made in full freedom, each one made against the easiest escape in the universe. Della Voss went very quiet. Nobody's ever said it like that, she said finally, and her voice was rough. Nobody's ever understood it as a choice. They all think it's a curse. The thing that happened to me, they pity me for what I can't stop doing. She looked at the blue cup, and at the chair, and at him. You're the first one who saw it was a thing I keep deciding. Because I study endings, Sethimal said, and I have spent my whole life believing that a creature reveals its truest self in the moment it meets its death. I was wrong. That was always too small. You have shown me the truer thing. He turned Corin's cup a quarter turn, and the gesture no longer felt like mimicry, it felt like his own. A creature reveals its truest self not in the moment it meets its death, but in the moment it is offered escape from everything, and chooses instead to stay for someone. You have made that choice more times than any being alive. That does not make you a specimen, Della Voss. It makes you the most decided person in the galaxy. And I will not let them put you in a chamber and mistake it for research. The words were out before he could weigh them, and once they were out, Sethimal Vor, 40-year servant of the Threnn fleet, understood that he had just quietly, irrevocably, chosen a side. He had spent 30 cycles sitting in a dead man's chair. Somewhere in there, without noticing the exact moment, he had stopped being the observer of the loop and started being inside it. One more person who would not abandon the woman with the 2 cups, one more act of loyalty stacked on hers. The iron verdict arrives in 11 cycles, he said. That is 11 days of tea. I do not yet know how to keep them from taking you, but I know that I am going to try, and I know that I am going to be in the chair when I do. Della Voss looked at him for a long time. Then she reached across and she turned Corin's cup, his cup now the observer's cup, a quarter turn so the handle faced him just right. Then drink your tea, Sethimal Vor, she said softly. We've only got 11 days of it. Best not waste them talking about the chamber. And he did. The 11 cycles did not pass the way Sethimal expected. He had braced for dread, for the slow tightening of a countdown. Instead there was tea, and there were stories, and there was the strange piece of a woman who had decided how she wanted to spend her remaining freedom and would not be moved from it. Della told him about Corin in pieces, over the cups, how he had once traded a working nav computer for a crate of fruit because he could not stand the thought of the seller's children going hungry, and how they had eaten fruit for 6 weeks and nearly starved, and he had said not once that he regretted it. How he hummed when he worked and never knew he was doing it. How he had taught her to find the door, not the literal doors, though he'd taught her those too, the maintenance seams and the forgotten hatches of 100 wrecks, but the other kind. There's always a way out, he used to say. Every trap somebody builds, somebody has to be able to service. There's always a door. You just have to be calm enough to find it. She had not understood back then how completely that lesson would define what she became. The machine had given her the resets. But Corin had given her the thing she did with them, the calm, the searching, the refusal to panic in the 8.4 seconds. The machine made her deathless. Corin made her unbeatable asterisk. And the cruelest joke in the whole cruel story was that the man who taught her there was always a door had died on a threshold, half in and half out of the one door she could not pull him through. Sethimal, for his part, did not spend the 11 cycles idle. He was an observer, not a warrior, and he had no illusions about fighting the iron verdict. A survey cruiser could not stand against a war frame. The patient measure did not even carry weapons worth the name. And his crew were not soldiers. They were scientists and technicians and catalogers of endings, 40 of them, decent and frightened and loyal to Sethimal personally, but not, he suspected, loyal enough to commit open mutiny against the whole weight of the fleet for the sake of a human anomaly they had only ever seen through glass. So Sethimal did what his discipline had actually trained him to do. He did not plan a battle. He studied an ending, the one the War Council intended, and he looked for its door. He found it in the science of the thing. The War Council's plan rested on a premise, and the premise was this: that Della Voss's loop was a mechanism that could be mapped, and therefore weaponized or neutralized, if only they cycled her through enough controlled deaths. The chamber existed to harvest that map, but Sethimal had 30 cycles of the closest study any Threnn had ever made of the phenomenon, and he had begun to suspect the premise was false, that the loop was not a mechanism in Della at all, but an asterisk relationship between Della and the 1,000-year-old field that had caught her, a kind of entanglement, a knot tied between her and a machine now drifting dead in a wreck light years away. And a knot Sethimal knew could be studied, and a knot could be described. And if he could describe it precisely enough, if he could prove, in the cold, flawless language of Threnn science, that the loop was not a portable mechanism but a fixed entanglement that would die with the distant machine and could not be extracted, mapped, or weaponized no matter how many times Della was killed, then the chamber became not a research tool but simple torture. And the Threnn, whatever else they were, did not think of themselves as torturers. They revered death. They did not defile it. A war council that would authorize 10,000 controlled deaths in the name of a weapons program might balk, might be asterisk made asterisk to balk, at 10,000 deaths that produced nothing but suffering and no weapon at all. It was thin, he knew it was thin. It rested on convincing hardened War Council Threnn of a scientific subtlety through the report of a single survey observer they had every reason to distrust. But it was a door, and Corin Voss had been right about doors, and Sethimal worked at it through 11 sleepless cycles, building the proof, running the models, drafting the argument that might asterisk, save the woman with the 2 cups from the chamber. On the 9th cycle, he brought the draft to Della. She read it slowly, the crude translator node rendering the dense Threnn science into halting human concepts. When she finished, she set it down and looked at him with an expression he could not immediately name. "This is good," she said. "This is really good, Sethimal. This might actually work." And then, softly, "But you know what it costs you." He did. He had known from the first line he wrote. To make the argument, he would have to stand before the Iron Verdict's commander and the assembled authority of the fleet and declare that the War Council was wrong, that they had ordered torture, not research, and that he, a survey observer of no rank, refused to carry it out. It would be the end of him. His discipline, his standing, 40 years of careful service. Whatever happened to Della, Sethimal Vor would not walk away a Threnn in good standing. He would walk away, if he walked away at all, as the observer who defied the fleet for a human. "I know what it costs," he said. "Then why?" And it was, he realized, the same question he had asked her 30 cycles ago, turned around and handed back. "You could run, you could stay clean, you could let them take me and keep your 40 years. Why choose the hard thing when the easy door is right there? You could file your report and stand aside. Nobody would blame you. You're an observer. Observers observe. Why put yourself in the chamber next to me?" Sethimal considered the 2 cups of tea between them. The blue one chipped, Corin's that had become his. The dwindling tin, 3 days from empty now. "Because you taught me the answer," he said, "every cycle, without ever meaning to teach me anything." He turned his cup a quarter turn. "I asked you why you stay when you could run, and you showed me that staying is the truest thing a creature can do, that a choice to remain made freely when the easiest door in the universe stands open is worth more than any escape. I have watched you make that choice 2,000 times over. I would be a poor student of endings if I watched you do it and learned nothing." He met her eyes. "You are offered the ultimate escape, and you choose the cup of tea. Now I am offered a lesser escape, my rank, my standing, my clean walk away, and I find that I would rather choose the cup of tea. The chair is mine now, Della Voss. I don't intend to leave it empty." Della Voss put her hand over her mouth. It was the closest Sethimal had seen her come to breaking, in all their cycles, closer than when she'd told him about the threshold, closer than when she'd counted her 2,000 deaths. "He'd have liked you," she said when she could speak. "Corin, he'd have, God, he'd have liked you so much. He was always picking up strays, trading his nav computer for somebody else's kids." A wet laugh. "And here he is doing it again. 2 years dead and still picking up strays, still getting somebody to choose the hard right door because he taught them there was always a door." She reached across and turned Corin's cup toward Sethimal, the handle just so. "Drink your tea, observer. Whatever happens, drink your tea." And so they drank on the 9th cycle, and the 10th, and the tin grew light in Della's hand. The Iron Verdict arrived on the 11th cycle, and it filled the patient measure's view screens like a wall. It was everything the survey cruiser was not: vast, armored, bristling, a fortress that moved. Its commander was a Threnn named Vashquil Wren, a decorated line officer with a reputation for exactness, and when Vashquil's image resolved on Sethimal's bridge, the commander did not waste words. "Observer Vor the specimen, it is contained." "She is aboard," Sethimal said. "In the lower suite. She is not restrained because she cannot be restrained, as my reports have made clear. She is drinking tea." A flicker of distaste crossed Vashquil's features. "You refer to it as she asterisk. She has a name, Della Voss, and a mind and a history and Sethimal chose the word with care, a grief. I have spent 30 cycles in her company. I know more about the phenomenon than any Threnn alive, and I must formally advise the commander before any transfer takes place that the War Council has made an error of fact and that the chamber protocol will produce no weapon, no map, and no result but atrocity." He drew himself up. "I request an hour. 1 hour before you take her, to present what I have found. If after the hour the commander still wishes to proceed, I will not be able to stop you. But I will have discharged my duty as an observer, which is to report the truth of an ending, even when the fleet would rather not hear it." The bridge of the patient measure was very quiet. Sethimal's crew watched their chief observer stake his 40 years on a single hour, and none of them breathed. Vashquil Wren studied him through the screen for a long moment. "You have the reputation of a serious Threnn, Vor," the commander said at last. 40 years without a mark against you. That reputation buys you your hour. But understand, If your 1 hour is sentiment dressed as science, if you have let a warm-blooded anomaly cloud a serious mind, then I will render the specimen and I will render your career alongside it, and I will not lose sleep over either. A pause. You have your hour. Present your case. I will come aboard to hear it myself. The screen went dark. Sethimal let out a long breath. Behind him, Alo, young, frightened Alo, who had catalogued 241 deaths and never once thought he would be part of a mutiny of science against the fleet, said quietly, "Honored observer, if this fails—" "If this fails," Sethimal said, "then I will have failed doing the one decent thing available to me, which is more than I could have said for most of my 40 years. He turned toward the lift that would carry him down to the containment suite. "Tell Commander Vashquil I will meet him in the lower suite. Not a lab, not a chamber. I want him to hear the case in the one place it can be understood." He paused at the lift door. "And Alo, prepare a 3rd cup." "A 3rd cup, honored observer." "For the commander," said Sethimal Vor. "If Vashquil Wren means to decide whether Della Voss lives or is fed to a machine forever, then he will do it sitting down, with tea, looking her in the eye. He will not do it from behind glass. I am finished with glass." He rode the lift down alone, rehearsing the door he had built out of science and desperation, not knowing whether it would open, knowing only that he would stand in it and that he would not, whatever came, leave the chair empty. There were smaller cycles Sethimal would remember for the rest of his life, folded in between the large ones, the days of tea that had no crisis in them, that were only tea, that he had not known at the time were the point of everything. On the 14th cycle, before the order came, before he knew any warframe was inbound, Sethimal asked Della a question he had been carrying for a week and had not found the shape of. "When you are in the loop," he said, "the 8.4 seconds, what is it like from inside? My instruments record the reset. They cannot record he searched, the experience of it, whether it is instant, whether you feel the time turn." Della considered the question the way she considered everything now, as if turning it over to check for exits. "It's not instant," she said. "That's the thing nobody understands. People think it's like a save point in a game, you die, you blink, you're back. It isn't. I feel every one of the 8.4 seconds, both directions." She wrapped her hands around the blue cup. "There's the forward part where I'm dying. I feel that fully, every time. The bolt, the gas, the vacuum, whatever it is. I feel it arrive and I feel it finish me. And then there's the I don't have a word, the fold, where time runs backward through those 8.4 seconds and I'm being unkilled, and I feel that too, and it's worse than the dying, honestly. It's the most unnatural thing a body can experience, being pulled back through your own last seconds against the grain of everything. And then I'm standing where I stood, whole, with all of it fresh. And 8.4 seconds have not passed, but I have lived them twice." Sethimal sat very still. "You feel the dying every time fully." "Every time fully. 241 times on your ship, 2,000 in the chamber. However many thousand in the 2 years between." She said it flatly, the way she said all the worst things. "That's the part your war council never bothered to imagine when they drew up their chamber. They think I can't die, so they think dying costs me nothing, so they think they can spend my deaths like coins. But I don't skip the dying, observer. I do the dying, all of it, in full. I just don't get to stay dead, which sounds like mercy and is the opposite of mercy. Mercy would be getting to stop. I get to feel the ending forever and never once arrive at it." That is, Sethimal found his discipline had no word for it. His whole field was built on the premise that death was the terminus, the wall, the one experience a creature had exactly once. He had never conceived of a creature that had the experience of dying without the release of being dead. It was, he understood slowly, a kind of torture so pure that his civilization had never invented a name for it, because his civilization had never imagined it was possible. "That is a thing my people have no philosophy for," he said. "We revere death because it is final. It is the one door that opens once. You have been made to walk through it thousands of times and never pass through. You have the experience of ending, stripped of the mercy of the end. Now you're getting it, she almost smiled. So when you look at me pouring tea, calm as anything, understand what that calm costs. I'm not calm because dying is easy for me. I'm calm because I've done the hardest thing a body can do so many thousands of times that I've had to build a room inside myself where none of it can reach. And the tea is the room. The tea is the one place the dying doesn't follow me. One cup, and for the length of it, I'm not the thing in the killing room. I'm just a person who had a long day telling someone about it. She turned Corin's cup. That's why I won't give it up. Not for anything. You take the tea away, you leave me alone in the dying with no room to go to. That's the actual chamber, Sethimal, not the room your war council builds, the one I'd be in without this cup. Sethimal Vor understood then that he had been wrong about the stakes from the beginning. He had thought he was fighting to save Della Voss's life. But her life could not be taken. That was the whole cruel point of her. What he was fighting to save was smaller and infinitely larger, the one room inside her where the dying could not follow. The ritual, the second cup, the chair that was not empty. That was the thing the chamber would destroy, not by killing her, which was impossible, but by taking away the only place in all creation where she was allowed, for the length of one cup of tea, to not be dying. I will not let them take the tea, he said, and it was a different vow than the one he had made before, deeper, and he meant it in a way he had not known he could mean anything. I know, Della said, that's why you're in the chair. On the 17th cycle, she taught him to make it. This surprised him more than anything else had. She had guarded the tin so carefully, rationed the leaves so precisely, that he had assumed the ritual was hers alone, untransferable, a thing he could witness but never touch. But on the 17th cycle she pushed the tin across the table to him and said, "Your turn. I want to see you do it wrong so I can tell you what Corin would have said." And she talked him through it. The exact measure of leaves more than seemed reasonable. Corin always said weak tea was an insult to the water. The temperature just off the boil. You scald it, you've killed it. The waiting, that private interval she had always kept by some internal clock, which turned out to be nothing mystical at all. Just long enough to tell someone the first thing about your day, and then it's ready. Sethimal made it wrong 3 times. She corrected him each time with a patience that undid something in his chest, because he understood she was not just teaching him tea. She was teaching him the ritual so that it would survive her, so that if the worst came, if the warframe took her after all, someone in the galaxy would still know how to make Corin's tea the right way, would still know to set the second cup, would carry the small, quiet flame of it forward the way she had carried it forward out of the killing room. "Why teach me this?" he asked on the 3rd failed attempt, "if you're so sure I'll save you." Della was quiet. "Because I'm not sure," she said. "I'm never sure. That's what 2,000 deaths does to you. You stop believing in the door until you're standing in it. So I plan for the door not opening. I always have. And if it doesn't open, Sethimal, if they take me and I go into a room with no second cup and no chair that isn't empty, then I want to know that somewhere out here someone is still making the tea right, still setting 2 cups, still turning one of them a quarter turn for somebody who isn't there." She looked at him steadily. "That's the only kind of forever I've ever actually wanted, not the deathless kind, the kind where the ritual outlives you. Where the choosing keeps happening even after you can't do the choosing anymore. Corin gave it to me, I'm giving it to you, that's how it survives. That's the only real door out of any of this, not escape." Handing it on. Sethimal Vor made the tea for the 4th time, and this time he made it right, and Della Voss drank it and closed her eyes and said, There he is. You found him." And Sethimal understood that he had just been trusted with the most important thing a human had ever handed a Threnn, not a secret, not a weapon, not the mechanism of her impossible survival, but a ritual, a small, warm, quiet room built to keep the dying out, and the instruction to keep pouring the second cup no matter what came. He thought about that in the cycles that followed, whenever the countdown to the warframe pressed close. He had told himself he was fighting to save her life, but her life could not be taken. That was the whole point of her. What he was fighting for was the room where the dying could not follow, the second cup, the occupied chair, the choosing that went on. And he understood with a clarity that steadied him that whatever the War Council intended, the thing Della had handed him could not be unhanded. It was in him now, and a thing that has been handed on cannot be put back in the tin. There was a cycle, near the end of the waiting, when the crew of the patient measure came to matter in a way Sethimal had not planned for. He had assumed his people would not stand with him. He had told himself as much, that they were catalogers and technicians, not rebels, that their loyalty to him personally would not survive contact with the whole weight of the fleet. He had built his door out of science precisely because he did not believe he could build it out of Threnn willing to defy a war council. So it caught him off his footing on the 10th cycle when Allo came to the containment suite and asked, haltingly, whether he might sit in on the tea. Sethimal looked at his junior observer, young, nervous Allo, who had catalogued the 241 deaths, who had watched every one of them through the glass, who had written the observer has entered the loop without understanding what he wrote. Why? Sethimal asked, not unkindly. He genuinely wished to know. Allo's answer came out in a rush, as though he had been holding it. Because I have watched her die 241 times, honored observer, and I have never once heard her speak except through your reports. I have only ever seen the ending, the reset, the flat line and the scream of the instruments. I have catalogued her the way we catalog everything, by how it meets its edge. He twisted his digits together. And I find that I no longer wish to know only how she dies. I wish to know how she lives, what she says to the empty cup. Whether the thing I have been watching through glass is a phenomenon or a person. I do not think I can decide whether what the War Council intends is right or wrong until I have sat in the room. And I do not want to have helped feed a person to a chamber, because I only ever looked at her through glass. Was, Sethimal thought, the most honest thing he had ever heard a young Threnn say. So he brought Allo into the suite and he introduced him and Della, who assessed the newcomer in the first half-second the way she assessed everything, and then, seeing something in him, let the assessment slide off, turned a fourth cup a quarter turn toward a fourth chair and said, "Sit down, then. There's enough. There's always enough for one more. That's the whole point of the ritual. It doesn't run out because someone new shows up. It runs out when the leaves do, and not before." And Allo sat and heard her voice unmediated by a report for the first time and drank the tea. And by the end of the cup he was no longer a Threnn who could have watched her go into a chamber. That was how it spread. Sethimal would understand later, not through argument, not through science, but through the simple, unbearable fact of sitting in the room and being handed a cup. You could authorize the rendering of a specimen from behind glass. You could not authorize it after you had turned her dead friend's cup a quarter turn and told her about your day. The ritual was, in its quiet way, the most effective weapon Sethimal had ever seen deployed, not because it harmed anyone, but because it made harm impossible for anyone who entered its range. By the time the iron verdict arrived, 11 of the 40 crew had sat at the tea. Sethimal had not orchestrated it. Della had simply kept setting one more cup, and the crew had simply kept coming, one nervous cataloger at a time, and each one had left the suite changed in the small, unrepeatable way that Sethimal himself had been changed. He had come to the containment suite 30 cycles ago intending to study a phenomenon. He had ended up, without quite deciding to, seeding a quiet revolution through his own crew, a revolution made entirely of tea and the refusal to look at a person only through glass. "You did this on purpose," he said to Della on the cycle before the warframe came. "The cups, the crew, you've been recruiting." "I've been setting the table," Della said. "That's different. I don't recruit anybody. I just don't turn anybody away, and I let them see me be a person instead of a specimen, and then they can't unsee it. That's not a strategy, Sethimal. That's just what happens when you stop looking at somebody through glass." She turned Corin's cup. Corin used to say the same thing about the strays he picked up. He said he never talked anybody into anything. He just fed them, and once you've eaten with somebody you can't pretend they're not real anymore. He traded a nav computer for a stranger's hungry kids, and 6 weeks later half the docking ring would have died for him, and he never once asked them to. That's not manipulation. That's just letting people close enough to matter. Her voice softened. Turns out it works on Threnn too. Turns out it works on everybody. Nobody's ever really been able to look a person in the eye, drink their tea, and then feed them to a machine. You just have to get them to the table. Sethimal turned that over, and it lit something in him that would matter more than any model he had built. He had planned to win with science. The science bought the hearing. It would make the Warframe commander sit still long enough to listen. But the science had never been the door. The door was the cup. The door was getting the man who held the order into a chair, across a low table, with a dead human's tea warming his hand, looking her in the eye instead of reading a specimen designation off a screen. Della had taught him that without teaching him, the way she taught everything. You do not defeat the chamber with argument. You defeat it by getting the man who orders it to the table. Once he is at the table, once he has turned a dead human's cup a quarter turn and let the tea rearrange him, the chamber is already lost. It only ever worked at a distance. It only ever worked through glass. There was one more thing, a small thing, that Sethimal would carry longer than the rest. On the last cycle before the Warframe, when the argument was drafted and the models were built and there was nothing left to do but wait, Della asked him about his own endings. Not death. She had understood quickly that the Threnn reverence for death was not the same as his personal fear of it, but the smaller endings. The 40 years. The career he was about to spend. You're going to lose everything, she said. Your standing, your discipline, 40 years of being someone, and you've barely known me a month. She looked at him with the searching she gave everything. I've spent 2 years learning to choose the hard staying because there was somebody I couldn't leave behind. But you, why you? What am I to you, Sethimal Vor, that you'd spend 40 years on a stranger's cup of tea? Sethimal was quiet for a long time. It was a fair question, and he owed her a true answer, and he had to find it first. I have spent my whole life, he said finally, studying the moment creatures meet their endings. I thought it was the most honest moment, the one place a creature could not pretend to be other than it was. And in 40 years I saw 10,000 of them meet the edge, and I cataloged their dignity, and I believed I understood what courage was, and what love was, and what it meant to face a hard thing. He turned Corin's cup a quarter turn. And then I met a creature who is offered the escape from every ending, every 8.4 seconds forever, and who chooses to stay anyway, for the sake of a cup of tea with someone she will not abandon. And I understood that in 40 years of watching creatures meet their deaths, I had never once seen what you showed me in the first cycle. I had never seen a creature meet its escape and turn it down. I had spent 40 years studying the wrong door. He met her eyes. You did not just teach me something, Della Voss. You showed me that the thing I built my whole life around was too small, that the truest measure of a creature is not how it faces the ending it cannot avoid, but how it faces the escape it could take and chooses to stay for love instead. I am not spending 40 years on a stranger's cup of tea. I am spending 40 years to protect the only thing that ever taught me what 40 years should have been about. That is not a bad trade, human. That is the best trade I have ever been offered. Della Voss did not say anything for a while. She turned the blue cup in her hands and looked at the tea, and when she finally spoke her voice was rough. He'd have understood you completely, she said. Corin. He never had a word like asterisk discipline or observer. He was just a broke hauler with a good nose for old wrecks, but he understood the thing you just said better than anyone I ever knew. That the point isn't surviving. Anybody can survive, especially me, God knows. The point is what you stay asterisk for asterisk. She turned Corin's cup toward him, the handle just so. You've got it now, you've really got it. And that means whatever happens tomorrow with your Warframe, it already worked. The ritual's in you now, the second cup, the choosing, it's not just mine anymore. Even if they take me tomorrow, they can't take that back out of you. You'll keep setting the table, I know you will. She almost smiled. That's the only immortality I ever actually believed in, not the kind in my blood, the kind that gets handed to the next person at the table. They drank the tea in silence, then the observer and the woman who could not die, on the last quiet cycle before everything was decided. Outside, somewhere in the dark, a warframe closed the distance. Sethimal slept a little, though he had not meant to, and in the last moments before he did, he thought of the third cup he had asked Alo to prepare for the morning, the cup that would make a warframe commander sit down. Whatever the discipline of endings had taught him in 40 years, it had never taught him this, that the strongest force he would ever wield in defense of anything was not a weapon and not a model, but a cup of tea turned a quarter turn toward a chair, and the quiet impossibility of feeding a person to a machine once you have looked her in the eye across a warm table. Commander Vashquil Wren came aboard the patient measure flanked by 2 warframe officers, and he came expecting a laboratory. What he found was a small suite lit low and warm, and a young human woman sitting on the edge of a sleeping platform and Sethimal Vor in a chair across from her, and between them a low table bearing 3 cups of tea that steamed in the recycled air. There was no chamber. There was no restraint. There was no specimen. There was only the ritual laid out plainly, waiting. Vashquil stopped in the doorway. His officers reached for the sidearms they had been ordered to keep holstered, and stopped when the commander lifted 1 digit. "What is this?" Vashquil said. It was not quite a question. "This is where she keeps her days," Sethimal said. "Sit, Commander, I have an hour. I will not waste it standing." He gestured to the 3rd chair, and the 3rd cup, filled and set at the place Alo had prepared. "You came to decide the fate of an anomaly. You will do it looking at her. That is the only condition I place on my own hour, and I place it because I am an observer, and I know that no ending is understood from a distance." For a moment Sethimal thought the commander would refuse, would turn on his heel and order the rendering and end them both. Vashquil Wren was not a Threnn who took conditions from junior observers, but something in the room held him. Perhaps it was the 3 cups. Perhaps it was the human woman who had not risen, had not pleaded, had only looked at him with that steady searching assessment, and then, deliberately, reached out and turned the commander's cup a quarter turn, so the handle faced his chair just right. Vashquil Wren sat down. His officers did not. He picked up the cup, looked at it, did not drink. "Your hour," he said. "Begin." And Sethimal began. He laid out the science first, because that was the door he had built. He explained the entanglement, the knot between Della and the dead machine in the distant wreck. He showed the models, the correlative data from 30 cycles, the proof that the loop was not a portable mechanism residing in Della's body but a fixed relationship that no dissection could extract, no chamber could map, no death could harvest. "You cannot weaponize her," Sethimal said. "You cannot learn her. The knowledge the War Council wants is not in her to be taken. Kill her 10,000 times in your chamber, and you will learn precisely what my instruments have already learned in 241, that she resets in 8.4 seconds and carries the memory forward. That is all. That is the entire yield. There is no weapon at the bottom of the chamber. There is only a woman dying forever for nothing." Vashquil listened. He was, whatever else, a serious Threnn. He followed the science, and Sethimal watched the commander's certainty begin, fractionally, to crack, not toward mercy, but toward the pragmatism of an officer who did not want to expend a chamber and a warframe's time on a program that would yield no weapon. But it was not the science that turned it. Sethimal had known, in some part of himself, that it would not be the science. The science bought the hearing. Something else would have to buy the verdict. "Commander," Sethimal said, when the models were done, "may I show you the thing the instruments cannot show, the thing that is the actual reason I stand here staking 40 years. "You may try," said Vashquil Wren. Sethimal turned to Della. "Show him," he said gently. "Show him what you do." "Not for me, I have seen it, for him. so he decides with open eyes. Della Voss looked at the commander for a long moment. Then she stood and she walked to the far wall of the suite where a maintenance panel sat flush in the bulkhead, and she pressed her hand against it and she said without drama, "There's a door here, behind this panel, a service crawlway. It runs to the aft shuttle bay. I found it on my second cycle aboard this ship." She turned back to face the room. "I've known for 30 days that I could leave through it. Die my way past the pressure seal 3 loops, maybe 4. I've done the math. I've done the deaths in my head, and be in a shuttle and gone before your warframe ever arrived. I could leave right now, Commander, in front of you. You couldn't stop me. Nobody in this galaxy can stop me leaving a room. That's the one thing I'm better at than anything that's ever lived." Vashquil-Wren's officers tensed. The commander did not move. "So why are you still here?" he said slowly. It was, at last, the right question. The question Sethimal had spent 30 cycles learning to ask, arriving now in the mouth of a warframe commander who did not yet know he was asking the most important question in the room. "Because of him," Della said, and she nodded at the cup, Corrin's cup, the blue one chipped along the rim that no living hand would lift. "Every 8.4 seconds for 2 years, the universe has handed me a door, a clean escape, out of every death, out of every trap, out of every room, and every 8.4 seconds I've had to choose. And do you know what I've chosen, Commander? 2,000 times over, more times than you have breathed in your whole long life." She crossed back to the platform and sat, and she picked up the blue cup and she held it in both hands. "I've chosen the tea. I've chosen to stay. Not because I couldn't go. God, going is the easiest thing there is. Going is the only thing I'm made for now. But because there was someone I wouldn't leave behind. First a man. Now a cup and a tin with 3 days of leaves left in it, and a ritual that's the last true thing I have of him." She looked up. "You want to know what I am? Your war council thinks I'm a weapon. Your observer thinks I'm the strongest thing he's ever met. But I'll tell you what I actually am, Commander. I'm a person who could run and doesn't. That's all, 2,000 times, that's all I've ever been. Somebody who gets offered the door every 8 seconds forever and chooses the cup of tea instead." The suite was silent. The ship hummed. 3 cups steamed on the low table and one on the platform that would never be drunk. And Sethimal Vor watched Vashquil-Wren, commander of the Iron Verdict, decorated line officer, hardened servant of a fleet that revered death as the final wall. And he watched the commander look at the human woman who had turned the ultimate escape into the ultimate act of staying. And he saw the exact moment the warframe's certainty broke, not with a crack but with a kind of quiet collapse, the way a held breath finally goes. Because the Threnn revered death. But underneath that reverence, older than it, was the thing the reverence had always been reaching toward and never quite naming. They revered the meeting of the edge with dignity. They honored the creature that met its ending well. And here was a creature who met the edge not once but 2,000 times, who was offered escape from the edge 2,000 times, and who chose, freely in full knowledge, to stand at the edge anyway, for love, for loyalty, for one cup of tea with someone she would not abandon. It was not death Vashquil was looking at. It was the thing his whole civilization's reverence for death had only ever been a crude approximation of. It was devotion, measured against the easiest escape in the universe, and winning every single time. You could not put that in a chamber. You could not render it into a weapon. You could only witness it and be changed, or turn away and be diminished. Vashquil-Wren did not turn away. The commander was quiet for a long time. Then slowly he lifted the cup Della had turned toward him, and he looked at the tea in it, and he said, in the flat, careful voice of a Threnn choosing his words at the edge of his own certainty, "My people have studied endings for 10,000 years. We believed a creature's truth was in how it met its death." He turned the cup a quarter turn, awkwardly, imitating a gesture he had seen only twice. "We were studying the wrong thing. We should have been studying how a creature meets its escape whether it takes the door or whether it stays." He drank. It was, Sethimal would think later, the bravest thing he ever saw a Warframe commander do, drink a dead human's ritual and let it rearrange him. There will be no chamber, Vashquil said. I will not render her. I will tell the War Council that the specimen yields no weapon, which is true, and that its rendering would be an atrocity against the dignity of endings, which is also true, though they will understand it less. My reputation will carry it. And if it does not carry it, he set the cup down, then I will have spent my reputation the way Observer Voss spent his, on the one decent door available. Della Voss closed her eyes. When she opened them they were wet at last after all the dry telling. Thank you, she said, just that. Do not thank me, Vashquil said, rising. I am a servant of the wrong reverence, discovering it late. Thank the observer who would not leave the chair, and thank whatever taught you to keep pouring the second cup. He paused at the door. The man, the one you would not leave, what was his name? Corin, Della said. Then Corin, said the commander of the Iron Verdict, taught my entire civilization something today through you that 10,000 years of studying death never could. That is not nothing, human. That is very nearly everything. And he left, taking his officers and his chamber and his warframe, and the order to render Della Voss died quietly in the dark between the ships and was never spoken again. The tin of leaves ran empty 3 cycles later. Sethimal was there for the last cup. He had made sure to be. Della measured out the final leaves. There was barely enough, thin and pale, the ghost of the tea it had been, and she poured the water, and she waited the exact private length of time, and she filled the blue cup, and she filled his, and she turned Corin's a quarter turn toward the chair that had been empty and was not empty now. Last one, she said. I know, said Sethimal. She was quiet, looking at the blue cup. I thought this would be the worst day, she said. For 2 years I've been afraid of the empty tin. I thought when the leaves ran out he'd really be gone. That the ritual was the only thing keeping him. That I'd lose him a second time, and this time for good, and there'd be nothing left to pour and no reason to set the second cup. She turned the blue cup back. But I don't feel that. Isn't that strange? I thought I'd feel him leaving, and instead I feel, she searched for it, like I can finally let the leaves be finished. Because the ritual was never the leaves. It was the choosing, setting the second cup, turning it just so, not leaving him alone, and I don't have to stop choosing that just because the tin's empty. She looked up at Sethimal, and there was something in her face that had not been there 30 cycles ago, not the assessment, not the tiredness, but something quieter and more whole. I can keep choosing to stay, for as long as I've got, however long that is. I just don't need the leaves to do it anymore. I've got a chair that isn't empty. I've got someone to tell about my day. Corin gave me the ritual, and you, her voice caught, you gave me a reason to keep it going after the tin runs dry. She lifted the blue cup, and this time, for the first and only time, she drank from it. Corin's cup, the last of the last leaves, and she set it down gently, and she turned it a quarter turn, and she smiled, and it was not the saddest smile Sethimal had ever seen anymore. It was just a smile. Goodbye, Corin, she said softly. Thank you for teaching me there's always a door. She reached across and turned Sethimal's cup toward him, and hello to whatever comes next. I think, for the first time in 2 years, I think I might actually want to find out. Sethimal Vor, chief observer of the patient measure, who had studied 10,000 endings and finally understood he had spent his whole life measuring the wrong thing, lifted his cup and turned it a quarter turn, and drank the last of the last tea in the galaxy with the strongest person he had ever known. Outside, the warframe was already gone, and the survey ship turned its slow face toward the long dark, carrying a woman who could escape anything and had chosen, 2,000 times and counting, to stay, not because she could not run, but because every 8 seconds forever, she picked up the cup instead. And in all his 40 years of watching things end, Sethimal had never once seen anything so much like the opposite of an ending. A young human, offered every exit the universe could give, who kept choosing, quietly, freely, over and over, One more cup of tea with someone she would not abandon.